This is ATS Mix.
Whoa, what am I hearing?
What is this? From AboveTopSecret.com.
Oh, crap!
Featured interview.
Dave, I'm rather excited right now because we have an interview with a gentleman, and I've been to his website numerous times, and I'm actually rather interested in some of the things and theories and concepts that he has on his website, and I'm hoping that our members and listeners will also be able to get a chance to get involved and get excited as much as I am. In fact, let me tell you a little bit about the gentleman we'll be interviewing. His name is His name is Dan Shaw. He's a filmmaker. He's an author. He's an alchemist, an environmentalist. He's a father of two. He's a poet, and he's been studying unusual healing techniques for over 20 years. In fact, one of his sons was born in a cattle trough not too far from you in Texas there, Dave.
Oh, really?
That's true. And so we want to welcome aboard to the ATS Mix, Mr. Dan Shaw. Hello, Dan.
How do you do?
Great.
Thanks very much for your phone call.
Oh, you're very welcome, sir. Thank you for accepting it. A lot of times, people usually just hang up on Dave and I. So this is a nice.
This is a
nice
we
change.
We actually do an interview without us having to explain ourselves.
That's
15
right.
times. Accept the call. Yeah.
Well, I have to ask this, sir, before we start talking about some of the things that are on your website. By the way, we want to remind our members again, that's www.vortexmaps.com or also www.danshaw.com. And if you want to go to those websites while you're listening to this interview, I'm sure that'll be much appreciated by us all. You mentioned when we were getting ready for us to do this interview that one of your sons was actually born in a cattle trough in Texas. Why don't you share a little bit about that experience and how you came about actually deciding to do this?
Sure. Well, I was struck by the library angel.
Yes.
I was living in the San Francisco area, and I walked past a bookstore, and at the back of the bookstore, this purple book caught my eye. And it was a book on rebirthing by Sandra Ray, and it happened to mention a midwife in Texas. And my wife at the time and I went in search of a place for support with gentle birth. We did end up in Austin, Texas, with a midwife who specialized in water birth, and that was my initiation into the realm of all things metaphysical and spiritual. And at that time, I started studying all kinds of unusual healing tools and techniques. There were actually a group of people in Austin who were attending regular channelings of a being who called himself Ascended Master Father Andre, and was teaching tools and techniques for ascension,
Right.
which I take to mean the dropping of all limitations on the physical when the physical body becomes infinite.
Right.
And so that my purpose is to facilitate personal and planetary ascension. And it all starts with my son being born in this cattle trough that had lovingly been passed from one expectant family to the next.
So you're telling me, Dan, that this cattle trough, I mean, it's really, of course, being born and bred Texas and living. Why are you laughing? You don't even know where I'm going to go with you.
He's heard of you, Dave.
Well, I know my reputation does precede me a bit, but I mean, a cattle trough. Now, I understand about the ascension thing, Dan. I understand all that. What are you laughing for? I hadn't even asked my question.
He feels the setup coming, Dave.
Oh, okay. Well, you just got through saying that it was handed down. This trough was handed down to different families.
Mm-hmm.
So you got it from a family before you, right?
Yes, my midwife has written a book. Her name's Rena Starr. She's written a book on water birth called Healing Power of Birth.
Okay, but I'm talking about the trough now. I'm not talking about the broad that wrote the book.
And the cattle trough was a good size and shape, and we gave birth at home in our apartment.
In the cattle?
And my wife labored and delivered in the cattle trough. And
it had water in it, though, right?
was a water birth. And
Okay, yeah, well, that's what I was trying to
Yeah.
figure out, because you said, that's what was confusing me. So in other words, you have a cattle trough full of water, and then the wife gives birth in the water of the cattle trough. Oh, okay,
because
okay.
being submerged in water does shift one's physiology. It can ease labor for some women and ease the transition, ease the birth for the child. So one of the things that I was doing in Austin was working on clearing birth trauma,
Okay.
my own and for other people.
Right.
And one way we do that is this technique, this breath work, sometimes called rebirthing.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about and I'm not making fun of the cattle trough thing, but there's a lot of people that have a strong belief, and maybe this is a offshoot of that. But I've seen several articles and things on the internet talking about how a lot of women now are actually giving birth in like pools, like not swimming pools maybe, but like a controlled atmosphere. To where the baby's actually born in water. So is that all kind of associated, the concept?
Well, exactly right. As I say, my midwife wrote this book on water birth, and so she had attended many water births, and this was back '86, and it's become much more widely accepted now to have even tubs in hospitals for women to labor in. Hospitals haven't completely accepted the delivery in water thesis, but I'm very proud of my son. He seems to have adjusted well to having a physical body.
Can he breathe underwater yet?
He came out with his the cord wrapped around his neck.
Uh-oh.
And so we brought him right up.
Oh, jeez.
Otherwise, children don't breathe until they contact the air. So some children are actually left underwater for a short period of time at that point.
Wow, that's
in
interesting.
In any case, that was just that was my initiation into unusual healing tools and techniques. I got initiated into transcendental meditation and studying Chinese medicine and acupressure and all manner of different tools and techniques.
Now, I don't mean to interrupt you here, Dan. How old is your son now?
My son Daniel is 20, and I have a daughter whose name is Rosetta, who's 17.
And now, was Rosetta born the same way?
No, but they both actually had a very miraculous aspect to their birth. My son had the cord wrapped around his neck when he came out. But during the birth, we had two lay midwives there, and the certified nurse midwife was at another birth. And my two lay midwives are huddled in the kitchen over their textbooks.
Right.
And I didn't think anything of it, but my son was staying very high and not dropping down. And so they were puzzled by that. But once he was born and we could see that he had the cord around his neck, there was a kind of innate intelligence that he did not descend until the last minute. Now, meanwhile, my daughter, my wife was laboring in the bathtub at home. And a long, long labor. And so finally she relented to go to the hospital. And had my daughter been born at home, my wife may have died of hemorrhage. But the fact that my daughter waited to be born at the hospital, my wife had hospital care when she bled after the birth. So there's a kind of divine miracle in both of their births.
That's fantastic.
Well, that's an amazing story.
That is wild.
Really is.
Well, listen, Dan, I want to deviate a little bit. As fascinating as that is, I want to go to your website right now, the www.vortexmaps.com. And it's a fascinating website. And I think a lot of our listeners and our private members alike might be slightly curious as to the question, what exactly is a vortex?
Well, I use vortex generally, in a general sense, to mean any place where the energy differs from the surrounding area. I'm using energy very loosely here, but I can define that more precisely. But any place that affects us, our emotions, our moods, our energy, or sometimes physically affects us, loosely I call that a vortex. There's a more specific definition of vortex I use because there's a specific kind of vortex that demonstrates some pretty inexplicable phenomena. One is called the shrink and grow phenomena, where two people on a level platform change places and appear to change height.
Wow.
In those places, there are a number of those which are actually open as tourist attractions around the U.S. There's one in Oregon, near me,
Right.
Southern Oregon. One in Santa Cruz that's quite well known by its bumper stickers, which is called the Mystery Spot.
The mystery spot. Been there.
Yeah, and there are other mystery...
Yeah, I had an ex-girlfriend that always used to talk about that one, too.
That doesn't surprise me.
Sorry.
Don't apologize. So there's this sort of vortex where there seems to be a very dynamic kind of magnetism that creates various effects, and one of them is this visual effect where people appear to change height as they move from one part of the vortex to the other. So vortex is a place which basically affects our human energy field in some way.
Right, right. Now, are these natural phenomenons, or is something else behind this? What exactly are causing these vortexes?
Well, this is not scientifically documented. There's no consensus on what's the cause of this phenomena, or even that it's a real phenomena, strangely. I wrote a book called The Vortex Field Guide, which is intended to promote research into this area. There are a number of different theories of what causes this kind of dynamic magnetism. One is that there are ore and mineral deposits, unique surface features, including water features nearby, various explanations, lava, because it has a magnetic signature.
Right.
May cause this effect. So this is a natural effect. My co-author on the Vortex Field Guide is able to reproduce this effect with a configuration of magnets. Really? He studies the vortexes for a different reason than I do, basically. He's interested in building a magnetic motor. And Nick Nelson at goldenvortex.com believes that the dynamic magnetic energy at these places could potentially be harnessed to build a magnetic motor. So in experimenting with different configurations of magnets, he's been able to reproduce some of these effects.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I'm on the website, Dan, on the www.vortexmaps.com, and you have this globe that says Earth. Obviously, I can identify that that's Earth, but it's sitting on this little stand, and I'm looking at the picture, Dan, and I mean, I told you off air, you thought I was kidding, but I'm really not. These vortexes on this globe that you have on the site show flat areas. In other words, it's almost looks like they're a bunch of diamond-shaped images. Now, is a vortex diamond-shaped?
Well, actually, that's kind of a sophisticated question, but wait.
Would you please repeat that again?
Sure.
I want you to repeat the part so all the members can hear that.
Because they won't believe it.
Sophisticated question. I need documentation. Dan. Was that a sophisticated question?
Yes.
I have published a map which was produced some 20 years ago by Beth Hagins and Bill Becker. Right. And it purports to show the natural geometry of the Earth. And it's composed of two geometric shapes, the dodecahedron and the icosahedron. It's a little hard to describe, but people can see it at vortexmaps.com. Right. So these two geometric shapes they're a pair. One has points where the other has faces. Right. So there were a number of ways to use that projection to construct a globe. This is one of them, and it's a model it's intended to be a model of the Earth's natural kind of crystalline structure. And so it does have 30 diamond-shaped faces, and there are unique geologic points at each of the points of the globe and at the center of the diamonds, such as the Bermuda Triangle, Easter Island.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go next, because you identify on the website the unique geological features that occur on these geometric points that you're talking about, like the Great Pyramid, the Triangle, Easter Island. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, I want to make a distinction there. There are unique geologic features at virtually every one of the 62 points on the globe. Mm-hmm. There are also built features, megaliths, and ancient monuments at more than a dozen of these points that have been identified. So it's somewhat inexplicable. It begs the question how these ancient civilizations, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, somehow on some level, consciously or unconsciously, tuned into this geometric vortex energy and built their monuments at these points.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, I have to ask something here. As we're talking about these vortexes, does this also relate to the other term that I've heard frequently called Leylines?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a specific definition of ley line, which is an alignment, a straight alignment of sacred places, and these vortex points often fall in equilateral triangles as well. So there are many different systems for mapping these Earth energies, and I use the term ley line a little more loosely. Generally, I'm referring just to lines of Earth energy. They don't necessarily have to be straight. They could be undulating, etc. But the strict definition is straight lines of these sacred sites. And of course, in Europe, they're very much in evidence on the landscape. That's where the term ley line comes from, where these alignments were first identified. In the U.S., we see many different geometries, 5- and 6-pointed stars. We see ley lines. We see pairs of circles forming a vesica Pisces and clusters of vortexes and all manner of different configurations. But the important thing to me is that twofold. One is that we're recognizing a natural geometry inherent in the Earth, and we're not. It's not an artifice that we're laying on top of the Earth, because we are pattern recognizing beings. So I like to be as rigorous as possible, and if I see some kind of circle of points or triangle of points, then I'd like to find a confirming geometry, a second geometry, double the size, or perhaps in a golden ratio proportion to the original shape.
Right. Well, now
to confirm the model.
Sure. Now, how would somebody? Because it sounds like we're talking about a lot of geometric lines lining up here, and I would imagine that when the lines cross is where a specific energy might be increased. How does one find these patterns or these vortexes in a specific area? How can one actually find it?
Well, we're often very much aware of the energy points in our area. We recognize certain high peaks or certain lakes as being places where we go to feel renewed and refreshed. The trick is to pull out a map, mark these places, the high points, the springs, the mines, the cultural points. If you can get a hold of an air chart, an FAA chart, it will show magnetic disturbances.
On the map?
And so, but on the map, on the air chart. So you can also identify these places by looking for circles and half circles on maps and on air photos in the vegetation. Yeah. You'll often see circles and half circles.
Right.
And so there are a number of ways. Also, there are as many different models of these energy points and lines as there are researchers. So I've gathered together many different kinds of visionary maps, not just geometric maps, but many different kinds from different researchers. So I can refer to maps that have already been created, but people can also map their own visionary geography.
You know, Dan, I've been, while you guys were talking, I've been really going over your website, which is just absolutely amazing. And folks, want to remind you again to please go to www.vortexmaps, that's VORTEXMAPS.com. And where I'm at, Dan, is, pardon me, I am on the FAQ, the frequently asked questions. And there's a question in here that I think is just a perfect question I'd like you to kind of respond to. Is talking about the history of the world grid theory. And one of the questions on the FAQ is human energy part of the grid system? And if it is, how does that all work together?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, beautiful. As an alchemist, I hold that there's no separation, period. There's no separation between you and I, me and the universe, that it's all one.
Right.
So I also hold that there's no separation between the human energy system and the planetary cosmic energy system. There's this correspondence, you could say microcosm, macrocosm. Our human energy field has chakras, it has acupuncture meridians and acupuncture points, and so does the Earth. And there's a reciprocal relationship. We can feel healed by the Earth, and it's also true that the Earth can feel healed by our presence. There's no separation there.
Right.
Wow.
So,
well, you'd mentioned alchemy, and I was just kind of curious, and also in the beginning of our interview, you were talking about how you were experiencing for the past 20 years, doing some unusual research in areas that mainstream medicine and whatnot are not looking towards. I'm curious if this at all was an introduction for you to getting interested in vortexes. I mean, what actually drew you to the research into vortexes?
I had just separated from my life. It was probably the most traumatic week of my life. And in those next couple days, I was introduced to these vortex maps, and that has been the next chapter of my life for the last 15 years. So it was really clear to me the influence of, I would say, my guides and angels in delivering this material to me. I was in the Mount Shasta area. I was headed for Lake Tahoe, and the woman who was hosting me said, "Well, have you seen how Shasta is connected to Tahoe?" And she pulled a book off the shelf called Triangle from Mountains. And I was so intrigued that I went not just from Shasta to Tahoe, but I went all the way to the Grand Tetons. And if our listeners will look at the website, or if they'll pull out a map of the western U.S. and draw a circle around the Grand Tetons through Shasta and Tahoe, they'll find that makes a nearly perfect circle connecting 19 mountains and bodies of water, largest mountains and bodies of water in their region. So the Tetons is at the center of this elegant circle of 19 points. So I took a pilgrimage to the Tetons, and when I got back to my home in Ashland, there was a letter waiting for me from Dorothy Leon, who had actually developed the map. So while I was on her pilgrimage, she contacted me and asking me to publish her book. I asked her if I could publish her map, and so I did. So I've been working with the vortex energy and mapping the vortexes for some 15 years. I've published these two maps, the world map that folds up into a globe, the wheel with 19 spokes around the Grand Tetons, and a couple years ago now I published a book called The Vortex Field Guide.
Okay. I have a two-part question I want to ask, and a lot of it is concerning what you were talking about with your pilgrimage. While you were on this pilgrimage, what did you experience? And my second part would be, are you unique to this experience that you had with the vortexes, or would ordinary people, or even people like Dave and I, be able to experience the same thing?
Yeah, right.
Well, I consider myself to be not particularly psychic or sensitive to subtle energies, but over the years of working with them, I have, I think, trained my perception to be more sensitive. So I don't have any special skills, or I wasn't born with any special gift. I very much approach vortexes from a rational, I hope, scientific, rigorous standpoint. The woman who developed the wheel with 19 spokes maps had psychic sight, and she could see lines of energy connecting the mountain peaks. That's how she initially developed the map. But I have to approach it from kind of a non-psychic standpoint in some degree. And so I believe that anybody can, in effect, learn to use dowsing rods or a pendulum, or to sense these energies in other ways.
All right, I'm going to take you in a different direction here again. Pardon me. You guys were talking about these different things, and while you're talking, I get a chance to mute my microphone, beat the crap out of a cat, and look at the site some more. And what I found here, Dan, is now I got to do a preface on this. This is a minor sidebar, Dan. I have a son whose name is Jack, his Jack Rabbit, and he said something to me a few weeks ago that at the time really didn't mean a lot to me, and you'll know why this is becoming crystal clear to me as I'm scanning your site. He said, gee, Dad, what's going to happen in 2012? And I'm going, 2012? What about 2012? He said, well, the world's supposed to come to an end and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, yeah, well, I'm going to rock and roll till 2012. And when the world implodes, then I'll worry about it. But until then, I'm not going to worry about it. Now, that said, I am on your site again. I am looking through all this amazing stuff. I'm telling you, if you don't go to this site at www.vortexmaps.com, folks, you are missing the boat. This is a Disneyland of information.
Yes.
All right, Dan, but here's my question. Galactic solstice, and if it's not spelled correctly or said correctly, who cares? 2012. And it says, if we consider north to be up, the Earth rotates counterclockwise. In the year 2012, the Earth reaches an extreme point in a cycle of approximately 26,000 years. The open magnetic field lines of the North Pole of the Earth will be pointing towards the sun, receiving a peak amount of solar particles. The sun's 11-year cycle of activity will also influence Earth's weather more strongly during this time. And then you have this kind of a question mark in bold print. Could galactic solstice be contributing to global warming, the greenhouse effect, and El Nino? So there's my question. Can this affect it in 2012?
Well, yes. I feel that, let's just say this is not my own theory. I do have a bachelor's of science in geography, nothing to brag about, but the Earth has many different movements to it. It rotates, it orbits, it has a movement which we see as the precession of the equinoxes. And there are these longer cycles that were known to the Maya and to the ancient India people, and written about in the Vedas, the time eons or epochs called the yugas. So in 2012, we're coming to this point where the North Pole of the Earth will be pointing most directly towards the sun. And that means that the magnetic field of the Earth will be accepting more of these solar particles, charged solar particles.
Right.
So that is happening now. It's not like it happens all of a sudden on 2012, but we are approaching that. We're nearing that point, and then there'll be some years on the other side as we move away from that galactic solstice.
Right.
So if this is an important point for me, I see myself as a kind of a midwife Remember my background in gentle birth.
Right.
I believe that this is a kind of a meeting of all the cycles of all different lengths. It's as if all the different wavelengths are meeting up. So it's kind of a birthday. And I believe that it's up to us to facilitate a gentle birth, that this birthing doesn't have to be traumatic, that it's not something that needs to be feared,
Right.
that we'll all be in the perfect place to play our role as we reach this point of a new cycle beginning.
Right.
And certainly there are a lot of things about the old cycle that are not sustainable that we need to let go of. And to the extent that people are attached to that old paradigm and feel dependent on it and identified with it, it can be a painful experience.
Right.
But I believe that it's our job to make it as effortless and joyful as possible as people do encounter perhaps extreme weather, droughts and flooding and high winds and such. It's up to us to, I think, do ceremonies and to do blessings and to help heal the earth. Because these extreme weather events, this flooding and high winds have been described as a way of Mother Nature cleansing herself. So it doesn't have to be catastrophic.
Okay, let me. I want to do one. I want to do one quick sidebar here because I just saw something that absolutely blew me away. Here again, this is on your site, www.vortexmaps.com, and it's talking about grid points. Now, I'm not being silly about this, but I'm just wondering. It says grid points, yin, yang, and balanced, and
Right.
it says grid points can be classified. Hot equals yang, cool equals yin, and then balance. Now, you always hear people talking about, yin yang, and I'm just wondering if this is where that phrase came from.
Well, there are many different systems for classifying these vortex points. They each have their own unique character and, I believe, healing properties. So one classification system labels them as, let's say, positive, negative, and neutral.
Okay.
Negative not in the sense of that they're going to be bad for our health, although I believe that anything that can heal can kill, and there are perhaps times when the vortexes are not necessarily good for our human energy field. So the map you're looking at classifies the points into these three categories. And again, that is just a model for research. I'm presenting a lot of other people's research.
Right.
And I am actually not really promoting one theory over the other. I'm putting a lot of theories out there.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I have a quick question here because earlier you had mentioned about some people perhaps would not be willing to give up a concept, a way of life, a paradigm, if you will. And as I'm looking through your website here, and I went to, excuse me, the Washington, D.C. page that you have, it says fitting the fractal of the Earth on this grid. And it appears that, I guess, Washington, D.C. falls on one of these marks. And I'm just curious, do you feel that a country or an area or a power, depending on where it is located at, can actually become more powerful because of being on one of these grid line marks?
It's certainly historically true that the Washington, D.C. was built on principles of sacred geometry in its design as a 10-mile square, in its location. The design and location of the Pentagon is not accidental. There's a number of fabulous books on the geometries of Washington, D.C., so that's well documented. And to answer your question, then yes, is true, I think, partly by magical intention, that these points have the possibility of enhancing our psychic abilities and perhaps our power. It seems evident that not just the U.S. government, but other governments are involved at these grid points.
That to me is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it really is. And I want to do just a quick follow-up on this, Dan, and that is there's several photographs that I just went to what Johnny was talking about. There's several photographs, and the amazing one is the one where you were talking about the Pentagon, and it looks like the outside boundaries of the Pentagon itself are within the framework of these ley lines, or whatever you call them.
According to that system, the Pentagon ties right into this pentagonal geometry of the Earth. Yes. And there are military bases, satellite dish installations, and nuclear facilities, etc., at many of these grid points around the planet.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's
a neat sign.
Yeah, that's mind-boggling. That's mind-boggling. Oh, I see. Oh, shoot. We're coming up close to the end of our segment here, and I still haven't asked most of the questions that I wanted to ask. Okay, I just want to, before we actually go to the end here, you have a segment on here that talks about 19.5 degrees. That's on your website. Mm-hmm. And I seem to see 19.5 degrees pop up in a lot of areas of discussion in other areas that I have read about. In fact, I believe Richard Hoagland is a big 19.5 degrees theorist. So could you share your thoughts about that with us too before we go to break?
Sure. What I'm interested in is the transformative power of geometry. I believe that our consciousness is geometric in a certain sense. 19.5 is a function of the tetrahedron, the geometric shape that has four triangular shaped faces, the angle of the tetrahedron. So when you inscribe a tetrahedron into the globe, certain points touch the surface of the globe at 19.5 degrees, and you do see unusual geologic features at these tetrahedra points, as well as the points on my globe, which are icosahedra and octahedra points. But for me, the bottom line is that these geometric constants that occur throughout all of creation have a direct application for the transformation of human consciousness.
Wow. That just really blows me away.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Dan, I mean, you are such just a superbly interesting person to talk to. You're probably one of our more interesting guests that we've had over a couple of months. And we want to remind everybody that you can go to Dan's two sites, and I mean literally, you better bring a lunch basket.
Yeah, you'll be there for a while.
Because you get there and you are just going to be absolutely astonished and amazed at the intricate amount of
information.
This is one last question before we end the show, Dan. How long did it take you to compile all these different people to bring it into, one site?
Mm-hmm. Well, I continue to be interested in this material after studying it for 15 years. I'm interested in anything I don't fully understand, and then I found working with this material to be transformative for me, and it has been gifted to me in so many ways, and my intent is to gift it onward. So I put as much material as I can up for free at VortexMaps.com, and if folks will contact me through my website, I'll be glad to send them a free packet of information, and I hope that people will contact me also to share their vortex research as well.
Oh,
and
that
also,
would be great.
Your website at danshaw.com, because it has contains a lot of your interview videos, does it not?
I've started doing more and more video interviews, not just about vortexes, but also about alchemy in general, the alchemy of music, creativity, music and art, and all manner of things. So look forward to seeing people, contacting people through my website.
Yeah, and I'm just looking through your Vortex events and updates calendar that you have, and boy, you've got some pretty interesting things coming up. One of the things that I guess really kind of drew my attention, you have what is the, and this is the last question, what's the Maya Adventure Tour 2007 that you got coming up August 28th?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a direct correlation, I would say a unity, between calendars and maps. A good calendar tells you exactly where you are in the cosmos, really. And a good map tells you exactly where you are in time. And for example, take a look at a medicine wheel. That is both a calendar and a map. Now, one of the great experts on the Mayan calendar is John Jenkins, and he'll be leading a tour, Mayan Adventure Tour. And I do my best to keep updating my website with new material at that events/journal and at the with new videos.
Now, hold on here 1 second here, Dave. I know we've got to wrap this up, but I wanted to ask this right from before doing our interview, and being a videographer myself for many, many years, this was a question I wanted to ask earlier, and so I'm going to go ahead and stick it in now. In your adventures and videotaping at different locations, have you ever been able to experience any of this energy affecting your cameras, or have you been able to actually possibly film or videotape any phenomena in these locations?
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of activity with light phenomena such as orbs and other kinds of light phenomena at these points, and you could call it a camera malfunction.
Right.
But sometimes you'll get one picture with weird phenomena inside the vortex. You step over to another place, your camera will act perfectly normally. So I do encourage researchers to bring a regular film camera as well as a digital camera, because you'll be able to photograph different kinds of effects. And these vortexes being very dynamic, not only will you see that a person will look shorter on the north end of the platform than they do on the south end of the platform,
right,
but that the shrink and grow phenomena will actually change over time if two people just stand still for a couple minutes at these vortex points. They'll notice a perceptible shift in their relative heights.
How about battery drainage on the cameras?
I've heard all kinds of stories about mechanical malfunctions of devices at vortexes, yes, and experienced them as well. Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
Well, listen, Dan, we could sit here and talk to you all night, but then it'd be a marathon event. We'd have to sit there and just have it in 19 different sections. Because I could sit there.
A long time
I
to
could talk to you all night. We could do 2 hours alone on the birthing trough. But again, we want to remind all our members and our fans of the ATS Mix Show at AboveTopSecret.com that we've been talking to Dan Shaw, who is an extraordinary gentleman that has just been a real thrill for Johnny and I to interview. And we would encourage all the members and fans to go to his two sites, the www.vortexmaps.com and also www.danshaw.com. And Dan, if you would hang on the line, we'd like to talk to you off air. Until next time, this is Dave Rabbit.
And I'm Johnny Anonymous. Thanks for joining us. And we'll catch you next time as we walk all over each other on this outro.
Yeah, really. All right. Take care, everybody.
ATS Mix from AboveTopSecret.com is over.
You've been listening to the ATS Mix with Dave Rabbit and Johnny Anonymous. If you have a comment, suggestion, an opposing view, or would like to participate in a future show of ATS Mix, please contact Dave or Johnny at www.AboveTopSecret.com. The views expressed on ATS Mix do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of the Above Network, LLC, or any of its affiliates. Thanks for listening. You may now reattach your tinfoil hat.